Mr. Annan's mission to help Syria pull back from the brink of a deeper catastrophe. This is vital for the Syrian people and for the entire region. I appreciate the recent initiatives by the Russian Federation and by China, including their engagement with Syria and with the League of Arab States. At this critical juncture, it will be essential for the Council to speak with one voice, and I hope the Council can find its way towards a consensus resolution that sends a signal of strong resolve. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me also add a few words about the broader picture in the region going forward. I see 5 crucial points to bear in mind. First, leaders must choose the path of meaningful reform or make way for those who will. People do not want cosmetic changes that give only the merest taste of democracy. They want accountable governance and firm measures against corruption and cronyism. Second, we must promote pluralism and protect the rights of minorities. Inclusive government should be the watchword in the region's new democracies. Third, women have stood in the squares and streets demanding change and now have a right to sit at the table with a real influence in decision-making and safe from violence, intimidation, and abuse. The deficit in women's empowerment has held back the Arab region for too long. Fourth, we must create opportunities for young people. To observe young entrants to the workforce, Arab countries need to create 50 million jobs within the next decade. Fifth, there must be regional peace. A regional awakening based on the ideals of freedom, dignity, and nonviolence cannot be complete without the resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Yet the past year has not brought new momentum. The peace process continues to stagnate. The situation in Gaza is yet again proving its unsustainability. I am gravely concerned at the latest escalation between Gaza and Israel, and once again, civilians are paying a terrible price. Rocket attacks out of Gaza against the Israeli civilians areas are unacceptable and must stop immediately. I reiterate my call on Israel to exercise maximum restraint. I have appealed to Israeli and Palestinian leaders to embrace regional changes and show the courage and vision needed to reach a historic agreement. Together with my Quartet partners, with whom I met this morning, we will remain engaged to assist the parties in forging a way forward. We must create the conditions for meaningful negotiations that will resolve the core permanent status issues, territory, security, refugees, Jerusalem, and end the occupation that started in 1967. This is the only way to achieve a just and lasting peace that will realize the vision of two states living side by side in peace and security. The region would also benefit from an end to tensions rooted in concerns over Iran's nuclear programs. I urge all sides to exercise the utmost care and restraint, commit to diplomatic efforts in good faith, and to comply with all relevant resolutions of this Council. Mr. President, Excellencies, 2 decades ago, a previous generation rebelled against tyranny in Eastern Europe. The international community was quick to help. Today, the international community should engage once again. As we do so, it will be crucial to move beyond some of the assumptions that have often governed relationship between Arab countries and their partners. One damaging notion is that the Arab world is not ready for democracy. Another is that security must take precedence over human rights. These have had the effect of keeping unrepresentative governments in power with little to show for democracy or security. the United Nations too must update its approach to the region. We are placing the full spectrum of our expertise and best practices at the disposal of the countries in transition. We are strongly committed to doing our part to enable a profoundly changing region achieve peace and realize its potential. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the Secretary-General for his statement, and I shall now make a statement in my capacity as Secretary of State for Foreign and Commonwealth Affairs of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. I'm grateful to the Secretary-General for his briefing, and it's an honor to chair this special session of the Security Council on the Middle East. The United Kingdom has convened this meeting for two important reasons. First, to call for intensified international efforts to support political and economic freedom in the Middle East while respecting the sovereignty of Arab nations. This includes meaningful assistance to Egypt, Tunisia, Yemen, and Libya as they strive to make a success of their transitions. And second, to call once again for urgent, essential Security Council action to stem the bloodshed in Syria. The Arab Spring, as it has become known, is already the most significant event of the early 21st century, with deep implications for international peace and security. It is therefore right that it is debated by the Security Council. Some people regard it with fear and consternation, but in Britain we view it in a strongly positive light. It raises the prospect of the greatest enlargement of human freedom since the end of the Cold War, and of a Middle East that in 20 years' time could be made up of open, prosperous, and stable societies. If this scenario were also to include peace between Israelis and Palestinians, a need underlined by the events in and around Gaza over the last few days, and include a negotiated settlement of the nuclear crisis with Iran, then the case for helping it become a reality is even stronger. But if instead we turn away from the region, if we downgrade our expectations and allow pessimism to prevail, if we send the signal that repression and violence will be tolerated, or if we allow Syria to descend into civil war or to remain convulsed by violence, then immense opportunities will be squandered, and some of the worst fears about the region's future could be realized. We can see today positive developments that seemed unthinkable 2 years ago, such as in Tunisia, the first democratically elected parliament since the 1950s, with 24% of the seats held by women, in Libya, a new government after 40 years of one-man rule, and in Morocco, free elections under a new constitution. Some of these countries face immense challenges, and there will be setbacks as well as progress in the years ahead. But this strengthens the case for helping Arab nations to build their institutions, open up their economies, and create strong civil society where such assistance is requested. Britain is doing its part in that. Our Arab Partnership Initiative is supporting projects in 10 different countries. The international community can do more on an even greater scale through international financial institutions, the G8 and regional organizations. The European Union has made a bold offer of support to the region, which must now be implemented in full. We believe that as we build on these efforts, we should be guided by three clear principles. The first is that demands for human rights and freedom are universal and will spread by themselves over time because they are fundamental human aspirations. This is not a new concept. It was enshrined in the preamble to the UN Charter and in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted by the UN General Assembly 64 years ago. It is a truth that governments ignore at their peril, and it is proven by the experience of many countries. The Arab Spring reconfirms what history warns, that when governments respond with an iron fist to the irrepressible dreams, legitimate demands, and unconquerable hopes of their citizens, they are doomed to fail in the long term. Repression is a policy of failure, and it cannot build stability. All governments in the region should embrace peaceful reform and make decisive moves in the direction of greater political and economic freedom. If not, we may see more of the violent ruptures that can follow when people demand rights that no amount of coercion will ever persuade them to abandon. The second and fundamental principle is that we cannot dictate change from the outside, and nor would we want to. There is no one model of democracy, and so it is for the people of each country in the region to determine their future, in accordance with their different cultures, traditions, and political systems. But no government anywhere in the world can justify violence against their people or say that the fundamental democratic principle, the right of citizens to choose and to change their representatives, does not apply in their country. In Britain, we will always stand for that vital principle, and so we must also respect the choices that Arab citizens make through the ballot box. This includes being prepared to work with new elected groups that draw their inspiration from Islam, while holding them to the same high standards of non-violence, respect for human rights, and willingness to respect the outcome of future elections that are expected of others. My third principle is that economic and political reform go hand in hand. Economic success is essential to support stability and prosperity, but equally there can be no long-term stability without greater political openness. And finally, the Arab Spring will be the work of a generation, and we must show strategic patience in not turning away from the region. But all these good intentions will count for nothing if we cannot stand by our values or meet our responsibility in the most urgent crisis today. The situation in Syria casts a long shadow over this debate. In the eyes of the overwhelming majority of the world, this Council has so far failed in its responsibilities towards the Syrian people. It has failed to address the brutal oppression of peaceful protesters by the Syrian regime, and it has not yet put its weight and authority behind the efforts of the Arab League. It is time for the Security Council to show unity and to show leadership. It should be possible for this Council to call for an immediate end to the brutal repression and violations of human rights, to demand an end to all violence and immediate and unhindered humanitarian access, to call on the Syrian government to implement its own commitments to the Arab League by stopping military action, withdrawing its forces from towns and cities, releasing all political prisoners, and allowing access to the media, to endorse the work of the Arab League and of Kofi Annan in his role as joint Arab League and United Nations envoy, and to support United Nations and Arab League facilitation of a Syrian-led political transition. I call again on the Council to adopt a resolution containing these essential elements. Beyond this chamber, British experts are working in Jordan, Turkey, and Lebanon to help document crimes against the Syrian people. I urge other nations here to join us in that effort so that the regime knows it cannot proceed down this path with impunity. Secretary General, not all countries here regard the Arab Spring in the same light, but we have a shared responsibility for maintaining international peace and security and immense common interests in working together. This was the very reason the United Nations was first created, and we should act together in that spirit now, not only in stemming bloodshed in Syria, but in long-term support to this vital region. Thank you. I resume my function as President of the Council, and I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Alain Juppé, Ministre d'État, Minister of Foreign and European Affairs of the Republic of France.
Monsieur le Président, Monsieur le Secrétaire
Mr.
Général,
President,
Mesdames et
Secretary
Messieurs les
General,
ministres,
Sir,
Mesdames
ladies
et
and
Messieurs,
gentlemen, ministers, ladies and
la Charte
gentlemen,
des Nations Unies a
the
confié
United
au
Nations
Conseil de
Charter
sécurité la
vested
responsabilité
upon the
principale
Security
du
Council the
maintien de la
principal
paix et de la
responsibility of
sécurité
maintaining
internationale.
international peace and
Notre
security.
organisation reconnaît
Our
également la
organization
souveraineté des
also
États et
recognizes the
la
sovereignty of
non-ingérence
states
comme
and
principes fondamentaux.
non-interference as fundamental principles.
L'évolution de notre action nous a conduit à reconnaître en 2005 que notre Conseil avait le devoir d'agir lorsque la responsabilité de protéger n'est plus assurée, lorsque les violations massives des droits de l'homme se déroulent sous nos yeux et que les gouvernements en soient responsables par leur action ou par leur impuissance. C'est dans ce contexte que s'inscrit notre réunion et je remercie le Royaume-Uni d'en avoir pris l'initiative. C'est l'occasion pour nous d'examiner ce que peut et ce que doit faire notre Conseil pour contribuer à faire du printemps arabe un facteur de paix et de sécurité pour la région et pour le monde. Depuis maintenant plus d'un an, le monde arabe connaît des bouleversements sans précédent. Avec un courage hors du commun, les Tunisiens, les Égyptiens, les Libyens, les Yéménites, les Syriens ont bravé l'oppression pour revendiquer le respect de leurs droits. Avec une détermination admirable, ils se sont levés pour crier leur aspiration légitime à la liberté, à la dignité humaine et à la démocratie. Pour la France, cet élan témoigne de l'universalité de l'aspiration démocratique. Il confirme des leçons tirées de l'histoire,
It confirms lessons learned from history,
en montrant une fois encore que les régimes qui étouffent la voix de leur peuple n'ont pas d'avenir, que tôt ou tard, les gouvernements qui bafouent les droits de l'homme finissent par s'effondrer. Le Conseil de sécurité n'aurait pas eu à connaître de ces situations si plusieurs d'entre elles n'avaient dégénéré à cause de l'obstination des gouvernements archaïques. En Tunisie et en Égypte, ce sont les peuples qui par eux-mêmes ont obtenu le départ de dirigeants discrédités et l'ouverture de processus démocratiques non sans difficulté certes, mais à tout le moins sans bain de sang. En Jordanie et au Maroc, les responsables politiques ont fait le choix courageux du dialogue, de la réforme et des élections. J'étais au Maroc il y a quelques jours à peine et ce pays est un exemple porteur d'espoir pour l'ensemble de la région. Bien sûr, rien n'est définitivement réglé. Bien sûr, nous savons tous que chaque révolution démocratique porte en elle des risques de déception et de retour en arrière. Nous savons tous qu'une transition démocratique demande du temps. L'histoire est en marche et les bouleversements en cours dans le monde arabe constituent une chance pour cette région du monde et pour la paix. La Libye, cependant, n'a pas eu cette chance. Et la responsabilité de notre Conseil a très vite été engagée. Le peuple libyen s'est heurté à un dictateur et à un régime déterminé à noyer dans le sang son aspiration à la liberté. Dès le 26 février 2011, expression de la réprobation universelle, le Conseil de sécurité a décidé, avec l'adoption à l'unanimité de la résolution 1970, d'imposer des sanctions et de saisir la Cour pénale internationale face à une répression sauvage que le procureur de la Cour a qualifié de crime contre l'humanité. Face à un dictateur qui promettait des massacres à la population benghazi, les organisations régionales, au premier rang desquelles la Ligue arabe, mais également l'Union africaine, ont appelé le Conseil de sécurité à agir. C'est tout le sens de la résolution 1973 pour laquelle la France s'est battue sans relâche. Mon pays est fier d'avoir contribué à faire adopter ce texte. Il est convaincu que nous avons collectivement pris la seule décision honorable et juste. C'est grâce à cette résolution que nous avons pu sauver des milliers de vies et protéger le peuple libyen. C'est grâce à elle que Benghazi est entrée dans l'histoire, non pas comme une ville martyre, mais comme un symbole de liberté. Je voudrais le dire sans ambiguïté devant vous, remettre en cause la légitimité et la légalité de notre action, insinuer qu'elle serait elle-même responsable de crimes, et ce contre toute évidence, comme l'a encore confirmé la commission d'enquête du Conseil des droits de l'homme, c'est travestir l'histoire et insulter tous les Libyens qui se sont battus pour conquérir la liberté. Aujourd'hui, en adoptant la résolution qui prolonge le mandat de la mission des Nations Unies en Libye, notre Conseil continue à assumer sa responsabilité pour aider ce pays à construire l'état de droit et les conditions de son progrès démocratique. Au Yémen, enfin, notre Conseil a su prendre ses responsabilités. C'est grâce à l'adoption à l'unanimité, en octobre dernier, de la résolution 2014, qu'un transfert de pouvoir pacifique a pu être enfin engagé sur la base de l'initiative du Conseil de coopération des États arabes du Golfe. Après des mois de crise et d'affrontements, un gouvernement d'unité nationale a été désigné, un nouveau président a été élu avec un large soutien, les tensions se sont apaisées. Naturellement, toutes les difficultés n'ont pas encore disparu, mais c'est une nouvelle ère qui s'est ouverte dans l'histoire du Yémen. Dans un cas comme dans l'autre, si notre Conseil a été efficace, c'est qu'il a su répondre non seulement à l'appel du peuple, mais aussi à celui des organisations régionales qui ont éclairé ces jugements et identifié les paramètres d'une solution politique. Aujourd'hui, notre Conseil est confronté à une tragédie, la tragédie syrienne. Depuis un an, et la première grande manifestation pacifique en Syrie à Dera le 18 mars 2011, la situation est chaque jour plus inacceptable. Sourd à la voix de son peuple, sourd à tous les appels de la communauté internationale, y compris ceux de la Ligue arabe et de ses proches partenaires, le régime s'enfonce dans une répression toujours plus sanglante, dans une violence toujours plus barbare. Cette fuite à l'avant, la communauté internationale la condamne résolument et dans les termes les plus durs, que ce soit à l'Assemblée générale ou au Conseil des droits de l'homme, le rapport de la commission d'enquête sur le contenu accablant pour le régime a été examiné aujourd'hui même, confirmant qu'un crime contre l'humanité est en cours. La première urgence, c'est bien évidemment d'obtenir la cessation des violences et l'accès des populations à l'aide humanitaire. Madame Amos prendra très prochainement compte de sa visite sur place à notre Conseil. Nous savons déjà qu'elle s'est dite horrifiée par ce qu'elle a vu. Nous savons déjà des crimes, des exactions et les erreurs que vivent au quotidien les populations syriennes. Comme Hama il y a 30 ans, Homs resteront dans l'histoire de l'humanité comme l'une de ces villes dont le martyr hante les mémoires. Seule une réponse politique aux aspirations légitimes du peuple et la mise en œuvre de
answer to the legitimate aspirations of the people and implementation of the reforms so sorely desired will resolve the Syrian crisis. This means a plan, the 22nd of January Arab League plan, largely supported by the international community, the resolution on the 16th of February and the 14th of February vote in the Security Council. There is no possible alternative. As the Council of Human Rights said, Syrian crimes cannot remain unpunished. The day will come when perpetrators will have to respond with the matters being brought before the International Criminal Court. Do not let us have any mistake. Our Council has a historic responsibility regarding the Syrian crisis to stop massive violations of human rights and to stop a spiral which could be fatal to the country and the region, abandoning Syrians to oppression and savagery, allowing a civil war to gain ground over seeking a peaceful solution. Being a member of the Council requires mobilizing for peace and security in the world. This is the common will. Our responsibility is to act, and it is now that we must put an end to the martyrdom of the Syrian people and enable them once again to control their destiny. A draft resolution is under discussion to respond to this emergency and find a credible solution to this crisis which continues to worsen. I say, as I said on the 31st of January last, it is unacceptable that our Council should be prevented from shouldering its responsibilities, supporting Kofi Annan's mission and the Arab League action. I call upon China and Russia to take their responsibilities. With regard to Libya, Yemen and Syria and the people there, we are up against the problem of the powerlessness of the Security Council given the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Another people whose claims are just as legitimate as those being expressed in the rest of the region. It is natural that the Palestinians want a Palestinian state to see the day. The security of Israel must be assured. France will stand side by side with Israel to ensure that. We shall not waver. Today we know that the solution of two states living side by side in peace and security is the only viable one and the best guarantee for the security of Israel. After so many repeated failures of the peace process, after so many years of suffering and deceived hopes, the time has come to change a method. The appeal before the General Assembly made by President Sarkozy last year means that we must, with the Council and all our European and regional partners, act together. France, over coming months, will do everything in its power to ensure that lasting and fair peace is established in the Middle East. When we talk of peace and security there, how can we fail to mention Iran? There, the situation becomes increasingly worrying, with the regime carrying out a manifestly military nuclear program defying our Council and the IAEA, a system which is likely to wipe Israel off the map, preventing free circulation, repressing the aspirations of its people for freedom and democracy, which every day becomes more and more isolated from the international community. Our Council has spoken firmly and must remain firm. We know that there are two unacceptable outcomes, military, nuclear. Iran or bombarded Israel. Iran, rather. We know that with what is going on in Syria, the principle of legitimacy is a cardinal one for all of our governments. The day when a government loses its legitimacy in the eyes of its people, it is condemned. And in this region of the world, one of the major questions arising is that of the ability to ensure that communities and minorities can live together in national unity, respectful of mutual rights and human rights for all. The promise of the Arab Spring is the universal right of freedom, which we confirm. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Juppé for his statement, and I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Harold Caballeros, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Guatemala.
Señor Presidente, agradecemos al Reino Unido haber organizado esta sesión y le agradecemos a usted su gesto de presidir. También estamos reconocidos con el señor Secretario General por la presentación que nos ha hecho. Señor Presidente, Debo decir que el tema que ha fijado para nuestro debate de hoy, si bien apasionante, constituye un gran desafío. Contrariamente a otros temas muy puntuales que hemos discutido en el pasado y que admiten reacciones más o menos precisas, en esta ocasión ustedes nos han propuesto una materia más general que entraña el riesgo de diluir cualquier mensaje que quisiéramos transmitir. Sería presuntuoso de nuestra parte ofrecer interpretaciones sobre el significado de lo que se ha dado en llamar la primavera árabe, cuya imagen paradigmática que cautivó la atención del mundo se produjo en la plaza de Tahrir del Cairo en enero del 2011. El extraordinario valor de la población, su serenidad, su solidaridad y la persistencia de sus demandas, y sobre todo su carácter pacífico, fue fuente de inspiración para toda la humanidad. Guardando las enormes distancias que se registran entre estos acontecimientos tan singulares, con las transiciones ocurridas entre 1800 y 1990 en mi propia región, de regímenes autoritarios a gobiernos civiles democráticamente electos, quisiera responder al desafío que usted nos plantea, señor presidente, con un breve comentario sobre las lecciones aprendidas de nuestras propias vivencias y que pueden aportar algunos insumos tangibles a nuestro debate de hoy. Con bastante modestia y consciente de las importantes diferencias históricas, culturales, religiosas y políticas existentes entre nuestras respectivas regiones e incluso dentro de las mismas, giro sobre las transformaciones de mi propio país para sugerir 7 puntos. Primero, cada caso en América Latina fue peculiar y seguramente cada situación en Medio Oriente también lo será. Por ejemplo, en mi propio país nos vimos ante la necesidad de adoptar un proyecto de nación multiétnica, pluricultural y multilingüe, respondiendo a las realidades peculiares de Guatemala, que no necesariamente son iguales a otros países de América Latina. Por eso, aunque suene banal afirmar que no hay fórmulas de validez universal para transiciones, y si bien los valores democráticos son similares en todas partes, su expresión concreta en cuanto a organización interna, ordenamiento jurídico e institucional y formas de participación popular puede variar mucho de una situación a otra. Segundo, los valores culturales importan, sobre todo en sociedades multiétnicas que buscan construir una nación donde impere el respeto por el prójimo y la tolerancia. Esos valores culturales deben ser compatibles con sociedades democráticas y comprometidas con el progreso económico y social. A título de ejemplo, es importante que todos tengan acceso a las mismas oportunidades, independientemente de su género, etnia, afiliación local, raza o creencia. Me complace afirmar que estos valores se han ido asentando y consolidando en nuestra región y confío que lo mismo ocurrirá en los países objeto de nuestro debate. Tercero, el progreso definitivamente no es lineal. No es fácil construir sistemas de gobernabilidad plurales y participativos donde no existía una cultura democrática plenamente asentada. Requiere fortalecer y a veces crear instituciones en varios ámbitos, incluyendo una sólida base constitucional y legislativa, el desarrollo de partidos políticos representativos y la garantía de la libertad de expresión. La agenda es compleja. Toca intereses creados, genera consecuencias muchas veces imprevistas y de vez en cuando exige golpes de timón. Lo importante es persistir y confiar que culturas milenarias que tanto le han aportado al mundo civilizado encontrarán la fortaleza, la creatividad y el liderazgo para llevar su proyecto de democratización a buen puerto. Esto me lleva al cuarto punto. Los procesos de democratización deben responder a los anhelos y acuerdos de los pueblos y sociedades nacionales. Requieren ser producto de un sentimiento de evolución propia, de una especie de consenso nacional y no algo impuesto desde fuera. Llegar a un modelo con el que la ciudadanía se sienta cómoda muchas veces entraña periodos prolongados de prueba y acomodo, lo cual solo confirma mis puntos anteriores de que estamos ante procesos de largo aliento. Estos procesos solo responden a la voluntad de sus propios ciudadanos. Asimismo, la democracia representativa tiene como requisito que los ciudadanos tengan confianza en los gobiernos que eligen. Quinto, hoy está de moda en las Naciones Unidas hablar del Estado de Derecho, una materia que no figuraba de manera tan prominente
topic that was not as prominent on our agenda a few years ago. I'd like to confirm from the vantage point of my own country the crucial importance of having solid institutions to combat impunity, lack of transparency in the management of public finances, and in general the administration of justice. We foresaw this in our peace accords, but confirm it more directly in addressing the threat posed to the rule of law in our country by the appearance of transnational criminal cartels. Combating this scourge requires strengthening our capacity in the area of criminal prosecution, our judicial system, our civil police, and even our jail system. Surely the same will hold true regarding the democratization processes underway in the Middle East.
En el caso de América Latina en general y Centroamérica en particular, la transición democrática vino acompañada de un fuerte impulso a la cooperación interregional. El surgimiento de gobiernos con valores compartidos facilitó los entendimientos y promovió el regionalismo. En nuestro caso, cooperando para resolver problemas comunes y promover el respaldo recíproco, fortaleció la democracia en cada país y contribuyó a su defensa colectiva. Pensamos que ese fenómeno de cooperación es trasladable a los países objeto de nuestro debate de hoy, lo que ya toma siguiente papel que desempeña la Liga de Estados Árabes. Por último, no olvidemos el imperativo de impulsar el desarrollo económico y social. Es verdad que los pueblos piden libertad y dignidad, pero también exigen mayor bienestar, sobre todo en sociedades marcadas por elevados niveles de desigualdad. Es interesante señalar que de acuerdo con la principal fuente encuestadora de opinión pública en nuestra región, Latinobarómetro,
there is a close correlation between economic performance and the level of satisfaction with democracy. It appears that the population does not only aspire for, but demands that more plural and representative governments generate tangible results for their citizens. When this does not happen, the index of satisfaction with democratic institutions falls dramatically. Mr. President, the so-called Arab Spring evokes sentiments that are in balance of a positive nature. That is why I have concentrated more on the opportunities than on the challenges in my statement. That is also why I have deliberately avoided touching on other topics which some will consider obligatory when discussing the Middle East, such as the imperative of overcoming the conflict between Israel and Palestine or addressing the situation in Syria, since we have addressed these matters in other meetings of the Council. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Minister Cabaleras for his statement, and I give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Sergei V. Lavrov, Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Mr. President, distinguished President, distinguished Secretary General, colleagues. The transformation processes that have set in motion the Middle East and North Africa reflect the aspirations of the peoples of those countries for a better life, broader opportunities for self-expression, participation in political life, greater economic and social benefits. These processes are still far from over, and it is difficult to make clear predictions about their prospects, since sometimes they're accompanied by painful civilizational, ethnic, religious and political rifts, and these create problems in terms of regional stability. The goal for the international community is to ensure that these transformations do more good than harm to the Arab world. The priority is to ensure that changes are peaceful and democratic. Fundamental human rights and freedoms are respected, as well as the rights of ethnic and religious minorities, including, of course, the rights of Christians. We follow with empathy the process of democratic state-building in Egypt and Tunisia, Morocco, as well as the efforts of the Yemen government to stabilize the situation and combating terrorism, for the efforts of the Libyan transitional government to bring normal life back to the country, preparing for elections and disarming insurgent groups. We provide humanitarian assistance and stand ready to help in economic recovery. For all of us in this chamber, the international dimension of the continued Arab Spring is of primary interest. We believe that we can already draw some conclusions. First, whatever goals might be set in any given situation, they should not be achieved by misleading the international community or manipulating UN Security Council decisions. Otherwise, the credibility of the Council is diminished, trust among its members is eroded, and this undermines the ability of the Council to make decisions in the future. Second, the organizations or countries that volunteered to implement Security Council mandates must give full account of their actions to the Council. That applies to NATO also, which, as we all know, which offered to secure a no-fly zone in Libya, but in reality engaged in massive bombings. It is sad that there is yet to be any investigation following information about civilian casualties caused by those bombings. We believe the Secretary-General should bring clarity to the matter by invoking the 2008 Joint Declaration on UN-NATO Secretariat Cooperation. Thirdly, interference from outside using raw military force increases the threat of illicit spread of arms, thus jeopardizing stability of the region. We should draw serious conclusions regarding the situation in Syria. It remains a cause of grave concern for Russia and the whole international community. Making hasty demands for regime change, imposing unilateral sanctions designed to trigger economic difficulties and social tensions in countries, inducing the opposition to continue its confrontation with the authorities instead of promoting dialogue, making calls in support of armed confrontation and even to foreign military intervention. All of the above are risky recipes of geopolitical engineering that can only result in the spread of conflict. There is no doubt whatsoever that the Syrian authorities bear a huge share of responsibility for the current situation, but one shouldn't ignore the fact that for a long time now they've been fighting not unarmed men but combat units such as the so-called Free Syrian Army and extremist groups including Al-Qaeda, which have lately committed a series of murderous terrorist acts. So if our absolute priority and sincere wish is to immediately put an end to any violence and provide humanitarian assistance to the civilian population, then at this stage we shouldn't talk about who started it, but rather discuss realistic and feasible approaches which would allow us to achieve the ceasefire as a priority. From the outset, our approach was clear and consistent, aimed at finding an early solution to the Syrian crisis without violence through a Syrian-led inclusive political dialogue and implementation of long-overdue reforms. The following 5 principles of settlement that Russia and the Arab League states agreed upon on March 10 follow in the same spirit. 1. End of violence from all sources. 2. An impartial monitoring mechanism. 3. No outside interference. 4. Unimpeded access for humanitarian assistance to all Syrians. 5. Strong support for Kofi Annan's mission to launch political dialogue between the government and all opposition groups, as mandated by the terms of reference endorsed by the Secretary-General and the Arab League.
На такой основе мы готовы согласовывать резолюцию Совета Безопасности.
On that basis, we are prepared to agree a Security Council resolution as we were ready to do last autumn when our draft resolution was put forward. Sadly, it wasn't supported by all Security Council members. The Arab Spring should in no way be used as a pretext to weaken attention to the Palestinian issue. We're convinced that the conflict potential in the Middle East and North Africa will remain high until a comprehensive settlement is achieved in the Middle East within the existing international legal framework. This is a truly historic obligation for the international community and for the Security Council. Unfortunately, the trends we've been witnessing lately delay rather than bring closer this prospect. Both in political terms, when the settlement parameters that have been repeatedly endorsed by the Security Council, the Quartet and the parties themselves are put in doubt, and in practical terms too, when settlement activity of Israel in the West Bank is literally shrinking the ground for the necessary agreements.
Особую тревогу вызывает нарушение
concern is violation of the ceasefire following the resurgence in strikes between Israel and the Gaza Strip, where civilians are suffering on both sides. Under these circumstances, the international community must step up its efforts. This applies above all to the Quartet that should start, as we discussed with our colleagues today before the start of today's meeting, which should start working on a regular basis and persistently create a conducive environment for continuing direct Israeli Israeli-Palestinian contact, aiming at full-fledged negotiations. We all welcome the initiative in Jordan, which held a series of very useful meetings between the Israelis and the Palestinians in Amman this January, and we want that initiative to be continued. Russia confirms also our proposal for closer cooperation of the Quartet with the relevant structures of the League of Arab States. We're confident that what's also still relevant is the Arab Peace Initiative, and that its comprehensive implementation will ensure the creation of a Palestinian state that will guarantee the security of Israel and will establish peace and stability throughout the Middle East. In order, Russia is ready for close cooperation with all responsible members of the international community in order to attain those goals. I thank you.
I thank His Excellency Minister Lavrov for his statement, and I now give the floor to Her Excellency Mrs. Hillary Rodham Clinton, Secretary of State of the United States of America.
Thank you very much, Foreign Secretary Haig, for calling us together. Secretary General, thank you very much for your leadership. Today we gather to discuss the wave of change that has swept the Middle East and North Africa. While each country's experience has been unique, all of these democratic movements have sprung from a common desire for rights, freedom, economic hope, and human dignity. These universal aspirations are enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and in the UN Charter, and they are fundamental to my country's identity and history and to those of many countries. These principles and the people who struggle to realize them in their own societies deserve and demand our collective support. We are inspired by the courage of the people of the region as they have shown their determination to move forward, and we believe that their efforts should be supported. Now, I approach these conversations with a healthy dose of humility because we know that these revolutions are not ours. They are not by us, for us, or against us. But we also know that as an international community, we do have the resources and capabilities to support those who seek peaceful, meaningful, democratic change. We must also have the will. Now, of course, change is unfolding in different ways in different places, and in each unique case, our tools have to be matched with the circumstances. Here at the UN Security Council, 3 cases in particular demand our attention today. Let me start with Libya and the encouraging vote this morning to renew and update the UN support mission in Libya, UNSMIL. Last year, this council, backed by the Arab League and countries around the world, acted to support the Libyan people at the hour of their greatest need. Today's vote reflects our continued commitment to Libya and its transitional government, which has made tremendous strides. And it also reflects the recognition that our work is not yet done. We will continue to aid UNSMIL's efforts to support the Libyan government as it reintegrates those who took up arms in the name of change into a professional national army and a peaceful society. We will continue helping Libya secure its borders against proliferation, trafficking, and extremism while treating refugees and migrants humanely. And after so much courage and sacrifice from the Libyan people, we are proud to help Libya build a new foundation for the rule of law and respect for human rights. Just last week, Prime Minister Al-Kib was here in the Security Council, where he forcefully and eloquently defended this Security Council's assistance on behalf of the aspirations of the Libyan people to chart their own futures. I don't think there's any additional comment any of us need to add to the record as to the appropriate measures taken by the Security Council in furtherance of the resolutions so authorizing action. We also met with Prime Minister Al-Kib in Washington, where we discussed Libya's progress in paving the way for fair and free elections, as well as our work together on security, student exchanges, civil society, and medical care for Libya's war wounded. Ultimately, the measure of success for Libya will not be the death of a dictator, but the birth of a successful, stable, and free nation. The second case is Yemen. As Yemen unraveled into violence last year, this Security Council stood behind the efforts of the Gulf Cooperation Council and Yemeni stakeholders to find a peaceful solution. In the face of setbacks, we held firm. Now, many challenges lie ahead, but last month's successful presidential election and inauguration were promising steps on the path toward a new democratic chapter in Yemen's history. As Yemen continues its multi-year transition, reforms its constitution, convenes a national dialogue, and continues to grapple with its security and humanitarian challenges, we must remain engaged and supportive. The third case is Syria. 5 weeks ago, this Council was unable to stand united against the horrific campaign of violence that has shocked the conscience of the world, one that continues unabated as we meet. We were blocked from even condemning the violence and endorsing a peaceful plan developed by Syria's own neighbors. Now, the United States believes firmly in the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all member states, but we do not believe that sovereignty demands that this Council stand silent when governments massacre their own people, threatening regional peace and security in the process. And we reject any equivalence between premeditated murders by a government's military machine and the actions of civilians under siege driven to self-defense. How cynical that even as Assad was receiving former Secretary General Kofi Annan, the Syrian army was conducting a fresh assault on Idlib and continuing its aggression in Hama, Homs, and Rastan. We took note of the fact that this past weekend in Cairo, the Arab League and Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov agreed on the necessity of an end to violence, full, unimpeded humanitarian access, and a political process led by Kofi Annan and based on the terms of the Arab League and the United Nations General Assembly resolutions. We believe that now is the time for all nations, even those who have previously blocked our efforts, to stand behind the humanitarian and political approach spelled out by the Arab League. The international community should say with one voice, without hesitation or caveat, that the killings of innocent Syrians must stop and a political transition must begin. The Syrian people deserve the same opportunity to shape their future that the Tunisians, Egyptians, Libyans, and Yemenis now enjoy. And our work here at the Security Council is just one part of what the international community must do to assist democratic transitions all across the Middle East and North Africa. We must support calls from within the region to strengthen each of the building blocks of stable, thriving societies, a responsive, accountable government, an energetic, effective economy, and a vibrant civil society. Politically, many countries, including a number at this table, have unique firsthand expertise in how to build durable democracies, and I appreciate the comments of the Foreign Minister of Guatemala. These are lessons we can and should share. Where countries are making gradual reforms, we should offer our support, and everywhere we must safeguard in word and action the basic principles of democracy and universal human rights. Now, I know that today there are those who question whether Islamist politics can really be compatible with these democratic and universal principles and rights. The people of the Arab Spring have a chance to answer that question. Our policy is to focus less on what parties call themselves than on what they choose to do. All political parties, religious and secular alike, have a responsibility to their people to abide by the basic tenets upon which this body is founded, to reject violence, to uphold the rule of law, to respect the freedoms of speech, association, and assembly, to safeguard religious freedom and tolerance, to protect the rights of women and minorities, to establish independent judiciaries, to promote a free press, to give up power if defeated at the polls, and to avoid inciting conflicts that pull societies apart. These are standards against which we should all be measured, and we need to commit to uphold them together. Our experience elsewhere in the world has taught us that successful political transitions are those that quickly deliver economic results, job opportunities, and the hope for a better future. To succeed, the Arab political awakening must also be an economic awakening. Governments across the region who share these priorities will need to keep making the sometimes difficult policy choices required to build a foundation for inclusive private sector-led growth. As this year's G8 president, America is continuing the work of the Deauville Partnership started by France to promote regional integration, economic participation, job creation, and stabilization. The last of these is especially pressing. The international community must provide strong support for the IMF to quickly conclude an economic reform and stabilization program with Egypt. And we call on Egypt's friends in the region and around the world to be prepared to use bilateral assistance to reinforce an IMF program with Egypt. And, of course, these efforts, economic and political, must include women, and I thank the Secretary General for making that one of the 5 points he recited. No transition can succeed with half the population left behind. And durable democracy depends on civil society, and we are proud to support individuals and organizations seeking to improve their own societies. Now, I know, again, there are those who say the whole concept of civil society is a Western imposition. But after 2011, how can anyone honestly say that civil society is not indigenous to the Middle East and North Africa, and I would add everywhere? We know that lasting change comes from within. Societies must be the authors of their own futures, but the international community can provide tools that help societies reach those goals. As new elected legislatures abolish old laws intended to control civil liberties, we should continue our collective support for measures that will protect and nurture civil society consistent with international human rights norms of free association, assembly, and expression. No one in the region is exempt from the demands for change we have seen. When a country like Iran claims to champion these principles in the region and then brutally suppresses its own people and supports suppression in Syria and other places, their hypocrisy is clear to all. And President Obama and I have been consistent in our belief that the Palestinian people, like their Arab neighbors, Israelis, and all people, deserve dignity, liberty, and the right to decide their own futures. They deserve a viable, independent Palestine alongside a secure Israel. And we know from decades in the diplomatic trenches that the only way to get there is through a negotiated peace, one that cannot be dictated from outside, and one we will continue to pursue through every productive avenue, including a quartet consultation this morning. And let me also condemn in the strongest terms the rocket fire from Gaza into southern Israel, which continued over the weekend. We call on those responsible to take immediate action to stop these attacks. We call on both sides, all sides, to make every effort to restore calm. Finally and crucially, we have to recognize that the most consequential choices are the ones that will be faced in the months ahead. It is up to the people and leaders of the region to resist the calls of demagogues, to compromise and build coalitions, to keep faith in their system even when they lose at the polls, and to protect the principles and institutions that ultimately will protect them. Every democracy has to guard against those who would hijack its freedoms for their own ignoble ends. Building prosperous democratic societies is not the job of a day, a week, or even a year. It is a continuous commitment and one we share. We as a community of nations must help the people of the Middle East and North Africa make the most of the rights and freedoms for which they have risked so much. Thank you.
I thank Her Excellency Secretary Clinton for her statement and give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Paulo Portas, Minister of State and Foreign Relations of the Republic of Portugal.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for organizing this very important, appropriate and timely debate. I also thank the Secretary General for his important statement. The popular uprisings that led to the so-called Arab Springs represent the most powerful transformation in world politics since the fall of the Berlin Wall. Although unpredicted, these changes prove an old rule of politics: failure to reform leads to revolution. And political leadership that lose the sense of history are bound to be on the wrong side of history. For too long did the world condone autocratic regimes, looked away from their repression of their own citizens, and shied from hearing the calls for freedom and for the respect of basic human rights. The upheavals in Tunisia and Egypt shook the foundations of this paradigm, and the imminent massacre in Benghazi stirred the international community into action in defense of the values and objectives of the United Nations. These were popular-led processes. They were not instigated from the outside, nor by Al-Qaeda, which is politically very significant 10 years after the 9/11. Mr. President, what is happening across the Arab world offers a unique opportunity both for the countries in the region and for the world at large. These countries have the chance to elect democratic governments, foster the rule of law, protect and promote human rights, value the role of women, respect minorities, and achieve widespread economic and social progress. The international community must also seize this opportunity to advance the principles of the United Nations, which we all share, thus strengthening the conditions for a more peaceful, prosperous, and stable international order. In order to do so, we must be clear on our aims and principles while striving to avoid old mistakes. Let me mention some of the principles that frame Portugal's perspective. First, the continued ownership of this process by the peoples concerned is essential. We are witnessing homegrown, popular-led processes, which are a result of the courage and the will for change from these societies. We should be humbled by their example, listen, understand, and help where and when support is required from us. Second, each country is an individual case and must respond to different challenges. We must recognize existing differences. There is no one-size-fits-all model. Third, resist the temptation of trying to export political models. Human rights are universal. Political models are specific. It is up to voters in each country to choose their own future, and we must accept without reservation the results of credible, fair, and transparent electoral processes. Fourth, recognize the participation of Islamic parties in governments as something natural in the political process. In democratic societies, parties will be judged by the people according to their performance and capacity to deliver upon their citizens' expectations. Fifth, religious freedom is essential to human dignity. We must not judge others on the basis of our own religious, social, or cultural beliefs, and we expect the same from others. We must distinguish faith from fanaticism. Six, building a democratic society takes time and patience. It is a path paved with tensions and often contradictions. We Portuguese have learned it through our own experience some decades ago. Finally, the broad institutional, cultural, ethnic, and spiritual diversity of several of these societies experiencing such historical and profound changes may raise specific tensions and security concerns. Therefore, social cohesion and territorial integrity of these countries must be constantly at the forefront of our concerns. Mr. President, Regrettably and flagrantly, one country has become a tragedy: Syria. Like in Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, or Yemen, the Syrian people peacefully demanded the legitimate fulfillment of their basic rights. Nevertheless, as we speak, the ruthless campaign of repression against the civilian population of Syria is going on. For a year now, women, men, and children are being killed massively, indiscriminately, by their own state security forces. Human rights, including the basic right to humanitarian assistance, are systematically violated on a large scale. The international community has clearly voiced its strong condemnation of these actions, namely in the United Nations General Assembly, the Human Rights Council, and the Friends of the Syrian People, which included a large and widespread participation. Assad's regime remains deaf to all these calls. Reforms were promised. None was credibly implemented. We regret that this Council has not yet been able to take a forceful, unified position to end violence and make way for a Syrian-led political process reflecting the Arab League proposals. How many more thousand dead will it take for this Council to meet its responsibilities? How long will we sit silent while the Syrian regime pushes the country into bloody sectarian conflict and civil war? The unprecedented appointment of Mr. Kofi Annan, a former Secretary General of the United Nations and a Nobel laureate, as joint envoy of the Secretary General of the United Nations and the Secretary General of the Arab League, translates the will of the international community to put an end to the suffering of the Syrian people. His mission represents the last opportunity to prevent Syria from spiraling into civil war. Therefore, I urge this Council, and I appeal to all its members, to unite in public and full support of Mr. Annan and the objectives he has outlined, in accordance with the resolution of the General Assembly, end of all violence, full access of humanitarian aid, and the launching of a Syrian-led inclusive political process. Mr. President, the profound changes taking place around the Arab world render the solution of the Israeli-Palestinian question even more urgent. Palestinians have the right to their independent state, living in peace and security alongside Israel. Palestinians have prepared themselves to fully and efficiently run their own state, and this has been acknowledged by the international community at large. Fulfilling the legitimate ambitions of both sides can only be attained through serious and credible negotiations between the two parties that take into account the rightful concerns of either side. We all know the solution lies in the framework of the parameters. What is lacking is political will. We need concrete and tangible actions that bring Israelis and Palestinians back to the negotiation table, engage in the substance, and accept a precise calendar, as proposed by the Quartet and the Arab Peace Initiative. Europeans have a particular responsibility in this context, and we must play an active role to break the present deadlock. Tensions are mounting and time is quickly running out. If a new surge of violence is to be avoided, both parties and the international community must act promptly. Rampant settlement activity, demolitions of Palestinian homes, and displacement of innocent people continue. They are illegal. They undermine the Palestinian institution and leaders. They increase frustration and create an explosive mix. We appeal to Israel to stop these activities, as they fatally threaten the viability of any mutually agreed political solution. Israel has legitimate security concerns, but they can only be fully addressed in an efficient way through a negotiated settlement. Mr. President, Portugal is committed to work together with our Arab neighbors and friends, to whom we are linked by centuries of mutual acquaintance, shared history, and common purpose. We will do it bilaterally and in the framework of the United Nations and the European Union. The work ahead is immense, but I believe that collectively we will prevail in the path to freedom, justice, and democracy. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Minister Portas for his statement, and I give the floor to His Excellency Dr. Guido Westerwelle, Federal Minister for Foreign Affairs of Germany.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you for the initiative and for your leadership, and thank you, Secretary General, for your briefing. Change has come to the Arab world. It has come because the peoples in the region, especially the youth, have stood up for freedom, participation, and dignity. I want to congratulate the peoples of Tunisia, Egypt, and Libya, as well as those of Morocco, Yemen, and Jordan, on the progress they have made, each in their own way. The Arab League has responded to calls for reform. We applaud the constructive role it has played over the past 12 months. The changes in the Arab world reflect the beginning globalization of values. People all over the world are demanding their universal human rights. The values of the United Nations are gaining ground. We are still only at the beginning, but in the long term, all the people of the region will benefit, and so will we, as the neighbors in the European Union, and as neighbors, we are ready to help. Germany took an early decision to assist the transition countries. Our support is guided by three principles. First, reform must come from within. We stand ready to support countries which choose democratic change. Second, no two countries in the Arab world are alike. Each country must choose its own path and find its own pace. Finally, we know that the road to democracy is not linear. It is a difficult passage which requires patience and persistence. Liberty and democracy need a promising economic perspective. We have offered transformation partnerships to all countries in question. We stand ready to support them with know-how, investments, and open markets in Europe. A focus of our international support should be on education. A good education for the youth is the key for any future economic success. Mr. President, many in the West fear the rise of political Islam. But the notion that Islam and democracy are incompatible is wrong. We have engaged in dialogue and with democratic Islamic parties. We are ready to respect cultural transitions. At the same time, we are looking for clear commitments to human rights and to the rule of law, to a pluralistic society, to respect for minorities, to religious tolerance, and to domestic and external peace. Women have been a driving force for change in the region. We urge all partners in transition to strengthen their rights. Mr. President, the changes in the region have made it even more urgent to make progress towards a two-state solution for Israel and Palestine. I therefore welcome the meeting of the Quartet principles today. All parties must do everything to ease tensions and to avoid an escalation on the ground. I am deeply worried about the flare-up of violence around Gaza. The shelling with rockets of innocent people is unacceptable and must stop. Mr. President, the Iranian nuclear program challenges the stability of the region and the international non-proliferation regime. A nuclear-armed Iran is not acceptable. The E3+3 and Iran have expressed their willingness to engage in talks. We want and we work for a political and diplomatic solution. There is still time for diplomacy. Irrespective of the nuclear issue, we will not forget how the Iranian regime has failed to respond to the legitimate demands of its people. In Yemen, the election of President Hadi marks an important milestone in the political transition. I visited Sana'a 2 days ago. Yemen continues to face tremendous challenges, but it is in a much better situation today than it was a year ago. Today, there is a genuine chance to achieve national reconciliation. The people of Yemen deserve our full support. We are all grateful for the peaceful transfer of power. The Gulf Cooperation Council played a key role. So did the Security Council and Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. These joint efforts made the Yemeni-led transition process possible. In many regards, the case of Yemen may serve as a model for political transition, for conflict resolution for this Council. Mr. President, this week marks an anniversary of the beginning of peaceful protests in Syria. From the start, Germany has called to the Security Council to act. There has been much discussion on Syria in this room, but the Council has failed to live up to its responsibility. Peaceful protest has been put down with horrific violence and murder. Among the 8,000 dead, there are hundreds of children. This violence must end, and it must end now. We have been watching with admiration the growing number of Syrians who risk limb and life every day for a better future. The people in Syria overcome fear every day in the face of overwhelming repression and violence. The source of their courage is both hope and despair. Let us give them here in the Security Council more reason for hope than for despair. Germany has been working tirelessly for a political solution. We must prevent a further escalation. Too much time has been wasted. We see three priorities. First, an end to violence. Second, immediate and unhindered access for humanitarian aid. Third, a process of peaceful transition led by the Syrians and based on the decisions of the Arab League. It is my firm conviction that only the Syrian people themselves can decide their future. They have been expressing their will throughout the last 12 months, and no one can doubt their desire for change. We extend our hand to all those working for peaceful and democratic change, in particular the Syrian National Council. In a new Syria, all Syrians must be able to enjoy their full rights regardless of affiliation, ethnicity, belief, or gender. I would like to take this opportunity to thank you, Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, to thank the Arab League, Joint Envoy Kofi Annan, the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Mrs. Pillay, and Mrs. Amos for their untiring efforts. Germany will continue to push for action in this Council, in other UN bodies, in the European Union, and with like-minded partners in the Friends of Syrian People. Sending a strong signal and taking effective action is what we owe to the people of Syria. We owe it to the people, we owe it to the children, to the families, to the victims, and we owe it also to the credibility of this Council. It is the only way this Council can live up to our responsibility under the Charter. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank His Excellency Minister Westerwelle for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Togo.
Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Monsieur le Président, je voudrais avant tout
Mr.
remercier
President,
le
I wish to commence by thanking the United Kingdom for having organized today's debate. It provides us with a special opportunity to examine the situation in the Middle East through the prism of the demands of the people and the changes
Je remercie le
taking
secrétaire
place
général
there.
de son
I
exposé
should like to thank the
et salue la
Secretary General for
présence
his
ici des
briefing
ministres qui,
and hail the
en
presence
faisant ce
here
déplacement,
of ministers
entendent montrer
who,
l'importance
traveling
qu'ils
here
accordent
today,
à la question
have
sous examen.
demonstrated the importance that they
Monsieur le
attribute
Président,
to this subject.
Il y a un
Mr.
peu plus
President,
d'un an,
a little
lorsque,
more than
en
a year
réaction
ago,
à un acte d'un policier qu'on pourrait qualifier d'anodin,
to a policeman's
un jeune
action
Tunisien a
which
choisi de
could be
s'immoler
described as
par le feu
unremarkable, a
pour
young
extérioriser
Tunisian
sa
chose
colère,
to set
mieux
light to
son
himself
désespoir
in
de
order to
continuer à
express
vivre
his
dans une
anger,
société
or rather his
où
despair
l'inégalité
at
se fait de
continuing
plus
to
en
live
plus
in a
de la
society
place,
where
une société
inequality
où se côtoient
is ever more
l'opulence
rampant
insolente
and
et la
where
pauvreté
insolent displays
rampante.
of wealth exist
Cet
side by
acte
side with
est le
rampant
détonateur
poverty.
des mutations profondes
This,
qui s'opèrent dans certains
act
États
of minor
arabes.
importance in itself
Il
was the
s'agissait
trigger
en
for the
réalité
deep-reaching change
d'une révolution
shaking
comparable
Arab
à celle de la
states.
France de
Really, this
1789
is a revolution
et dont Hegel
comparable to the
disait
French
qu'elle
Revolution
fut
of
un
1789,
splendide
which
lever
Hegel
du soleil.
described as a splendid dawn.
En effet, de la Tunisie au Bahreïn,
From
en passant par
Tunisia
l'Égypte,
to Bahrain,
la Libye,
from
le
Egypt
Yémen
to
et la
Libya
Syrie,
to Yemen and
la
Syria,
jeunesse s'est levée comme un
young
seul homme
people
pour réclamer
rose
plus de
up with a
justice,
single voice to
plus
demand
d'égalité
more
et une meilleure
justice,
répartition des richesses du
more
pays.
equality and
En
a
un
better
mot,
distribution
elle
of the
réclamait
wealth
la
of their
démocratie.
countries. Basically,
Surpris
they
par
were
l'ampleur
asking
de
for
cette révolte
democracy.
inédite, certains chefs d'État ont
Surprised
été
by
amenés
the
à quitter
scope
le
of this
pouvoir.
unprecedented
Toutefois,
rebellion, some
cela n'a pas
heads of
suffi à
state were forced
rétablir
out of
le
power.
calme, car en
However, this was not
réalité,
enough
la
to
finalité de ce
re-establish
mouvement
calm,
populaire de la
because
jeunesse
really
est l'édification
the
d'une
aim
nouvelle
of
société
this
démocratique.
youth movement was
Si le
the
départ d'un
establishment of a
dirigeant
new
peut
democratic
s'obtenir au bout de
society.
quelques mois,
If a leader
la
can be
mise en
ousted
place
after
d'une
a
telle
few
société
months,
démocratique
establishing
requiert plus
such
de
a
temps
democratic
et
society
de sacrifices
requires
à
more
consentir.
time and
Monsieur le
more
Président,
sacrifices.
les défis que
Mr. President,
recèle la présente situation au
the
Moyen-Orient sont nombreux, mais elles offrent
of the current
aussi
situation
de
in the
grandes
Middle East are
opportunités
legion,
pour le peuple de
but
la
they also
région.
provide major
Les défis,
opportunities for the people of
c'est
the
de
region.
reconstruire ces pays où la
The
justice,
challenges involve
l'égalité et les droits de
rebuilding
l'homme
these
sont
countries where
désormais
justice,
les fondements.
equality and
Dans cette
human
perspective,
rights may
le
be
rétablissement de la
the
paix,
cornerstones.
la
From
sécurité
this
et
point of
l'unité
view,
nationale sont en réalité les premiers défis à relever.
Peace, security and
Cette
national
situation
unity
est davantage
are the
compliquée
first
par la
challenges to be
circulation
met.
incontrôlée des
The
armes,
situations are
la floraison
complicated
de milices
further by
armées,
the uncontrolled
les actes de
movement of
vengeance
arms,
et
the
de
emergence
règlement
of
de
armed
compte,
militia, acts
le
of
refus de
vengeance
désarmer
and settlement
qui
of
aggrave
accounts
d'autant
and
l'insécurité
refusal to
et l'instabilité
disarm.
dans les pays et
All
régions
of
concernées.
these worsen
Un autre
insecurity
défi
and
à
lack of
relever se
stability
rapporte à
in the
l'humanitaire.
countries and regions
Dans les
involved.
pays où la
Then there
révolution
is
a lieu,
another
des
challenge,
milliers de personnes
humanitarian
ont dû
in
fuir
nature.
leur maison pour se réfugier
In
plus loin
countries
à
where
l'intérieur
the
du pays
revolution has
ou dans les
taken
pays
place,
voisins.
thousands of people have had to flee
Cette
their
situation
homes and
appelle
seek refuge
à l'aide humanitaire
in
urgente
the interior of their
qui n'est pas
countries or
souvent facile à
neighboring
mobiliser
countries.
ou à
This
déployer en
demands
raison des
emergency
difficultés
humanitarian
d'accès
aid, and it's
aux
not
zones
always easy to
sinistrées.
mobilize it or to deploy
Ici
it in
intervient
areas
le concept
affected
de la
where
responsabilité de
access is
protéger
difficult.
qu'il importe
This
de
is where
définir
the
clairement
concept of
pour sa
the
mise en œuvre
responsibility to
dans des
protect
situations où les droits de
comes
l'homme
in.
sont
It must be
massivement
clearly
violés.
defined so
Monsieur le
that it may be
Président,
implemented in
au-delà de
situations
ces
where
défis,
human rights are
il y a
violated
lieu
on a
de
massive
dire
scale.
que le bouleversement
Further,
dans le monde arabe
beyond these
offre
challenges,
des
it must be
opportunités.
said that the convulsions in the
Certaines
Arab
d'entre
world
elles,
provide
et de loin les
opportunities.
plus importantes,
Some, and
sont la liberté
indeed the most
d'expression,
important of
le
them,
choix des dirigeants par le peuple
freedom of
et la
expression,
participation des différentes
leaders
composantes de la
chosen by their
société
people,
à la gestion
and
des
the
affaires
participation
publiques.
of the various
Les révolutions au
stakeholders
Moyen-Orient rappellent
in
l'importance
society
qu'il y
when
a
it comes to the
à
management of
instaurer
public
une bonne
affairs.
gouvernance politique
The
et économique
revolutions of the
qui
Middle East
favorise le
remind us of how
développement.
important it is to establish good
Parce que ces
economic and
révolutions
political
procèdent du
governance
chômage
to
d'une
foster
jeunesse
development.
pourtant bien formée,
As
de la
these
pauvreté
revolutions
galopante,
stem
de
from
la flambée des
unemployment
prix des
amongst
produits de
young
première
people who
nécessité,
are
de la
quite
déficience
highly
de l'appareil
educated and
judiciaire,
trained,
de
they stem
l'abus de pouvoir et de la corruption, elles offrent des opportunités pour les nouveaux dirigeants de ces pays et pour ceux d'ailleurs de placer l'homme au centre du développement. Il y meilleur lieu de
opportunities for the new
travailler
leaders of these
dans
countries
un esprit
and
d'ouverture
those
et de
elsewhere
complémentarité
to
à la
ensure that
création de
man takes
conditions
center
propices
stage in
à ce
development.
développement.
It is appropriate
Cependant,
to
il est
work
certain
in
qu'à
a
eux
spirit of
seuls,
openness,
les nouveaux pays
complementing
démocratiques
one another to
ou
create conditions
ceux-là qui sont en
where
voie de l'être
development
ne
can
sauraient
flourish.
se reconstruire.
These
Il
new
faut les
democratic countries,
accompagner
though,
sur ce
will
chemin
not
en
be
leur
able to
apportant une
rebuild their
aide
future
économique
alone. They
substantielle.
must be
Celle-ci
helped with
pourrait les aider à offrir à leur société
substantial economic
un
aid.
nouveau mode de
This
vie
can help
qui
them
éviterait
to
aux jeunes
provide
de
to their
recourir
societies
à des
a
actes de
new way
désespoir.
of life,
Au
so that
demeurant,
young people will no longer have to
l'édification d'une
resort
société
to gestures
démocratique
of
devrait
despair.
s'accompagner de meilleures conditions de
Building
vie pour les
democratic
populations.
societies must go
Les
hand in
revendications
hand with
populaires
there
du
being
monde
better
arabe
living
sont
conditions
désormais
for
entrées dans
people.
l'histoire.
The claims
Comme
of
tout élan de
the people of
liberté,
the Arab world have
elles
now become a
constituent
part
un
of
pari,
history.
et comme
Like
tout pari,
any uprising
elles
for
devraient
freedom,
être
they
bien
are a wager
accompagnées.
for hope, and for
Je
that
vous
hope to
remercie.
bear fruit, it must be supported. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Togo for his statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Morocco.
السيد الرئيس أود
Mr. President,
في البداية أن أقدم
at the
لكم
outset,
الشكر
I would like to
على
express
تنظيم
our
هذا النقاش
gratitude
الوزاري
for organizing this
بخصوص
ministerial level
التحديات التي
discussion on
تواجه
the
منطقة
challenges
الشرق الأوسط
confronting the region of the Middle East,
والفرص المتاحة
as well as the
لشعوبها
opportunities posed
لتحقيق عيش
to its
كريم
peoples in order to
في ظل
live
السلم
in a
والاستقرار واحترام
dignified
حقوق
way
الإنسان
in peace and
وسيادة
stability
القانون.
and with respect for
كما
human rights and the rule
نرحب
of law.
بحضور
We would also
ومشاركة
like to
السيد
welcome
بان
the
كيمون
attendance
أمين
and
العام
participation of His
لمنظمتنا
Excellency, the
في
Secretary
هذه
General of the
المداولة.
United Nations, Mr. Ban Ki-moon.
سيد الرئيس إن التغيرات التي
Mr.
عرفتها
President, the
المنطقة
changes
العربية
that the Arab region has
دشنت
experienced
عهدا
have
جديدا
launched a new era
استردت فيه
where
الشعوب
peoples have regained
قدرتها على
their
التحكم
ability
في
to
مسارها
control their destiny
والتأثير على
and
القرار
to
السياسي
influence political
والإسهام
decision-making as
في
well as
بناء
contribute
حاضرها
to
ومستقبلها.
building their present and their future.
لقد أتت هذه التغيرات المتفاوتة
These
في مداها
changes were diverse
وفي
in
عمقها
their scope
وفي
and their
أسلوبها
depth and in their
بالكثير
methods.
من الإيجابيات والمكاسب.
However, they have brought about many
أولها
advantages and gains,
ميلاد
the first of
أمل
which is
حقيقي
the birth of
في
genuine
تجاوز
hope
رواسب
in
الماضي
overcoming the past
والتطلع
and looking
إلى
towards a
مستقبل
future
تشارك فيه
where
جميع
all
فئات
parts
المجتمع
of society
بكل مشاربها
with
في بناء
all the walks
مؤسسات
of life would
تحترم
participate in
إرادة
building
الشعوب
institutions that respect the will
وتشركها
of
في
peoples
بناء الديمقراطية.
and build democracy.
السيد الرئيس لا يمكن
Mr. President,
تناول
no one
التحديات
can
في منطقة الشرق
undermine
الأوسط
the challenges
دون
in the Middle
التطرق
East.
إلى
And when
الأزمة
discussing
التي
these
ما زالت
challenges, we
تلقي
cannot
بظلالها
fail
على المنطقة
to
بأسرها
discuss the
والتي عرفت
issue that has
في
been
الأيام
casting a
الأخيرة
dark shadow on the
تصعيدا
entire region
خطيرا.
and which in the past few days has witnessed a
إن
dangerous
أكبر وأخطر
escalation.
تحد
The largest and
لاستقرار
most
وأمن
dangerous
منطقة الشرق
threat
الأوسط
to the stability and security
يتمثل
of
في
the Middle
سياسة
East
الاحتلال
is embodied
والاستيطان
in the policy of
التي
occupation and
تتمادى إسرائيل
settlement
في
that
تطبيقها
Israel continues
ضدا على
to
الشرعية الدولية
uphold
وخرقا
in
للاتفاقات
violation of
المبرمة
international
وتجاهلا
legitimacy and
للمبادئ
signed agreements and
التي
in
أسست
disregard of
لعملية
the
السلام.
principles that have laid the foundations
إن
for the
انسداد
peace process.
الأفق
The dead
الذي يعرفه
end
مسلسل
that
المفاوضات
the
الفلسطينية
Palestinian-Israeli
الإسرائيلي
negotiations have
بالرغم
reached
من المجهودات
despite
الدولية
continuous
المتعددة
international efforts.
وتمادي إسرائيل في
And
تسريع وسيلة
Israel's
الاستيطان خصوصا في
continued
مدينة
speeding
القدس
up of its settlement
وبناء
activities,
الجدار
especially in
وإبقاء
Jerusalem,
الحصار
and its
على
continued
قطاع
construction of
غزة
the wall and its
كل
continued
هذه
siege on
العوامل
the Gaza Strip.
تولد
All of
اليأس
these
والإحباط
lead to
وتهدد
frustration
بالتالي
and despair,
أمن
which
واستقرار المنطقة.
threaten the security and stability
إن
of the
خلق فرص
entire region,
إعادة استئناف
creating
المفاوضات
opportunities to
والدفع
resume
بها للتوصل إلى
negotiations
الحل
and
العادل
pushing
والشامل
them towards a
يبقى
just and
التحدي
comprehensive
الآني
solution
والملح
is the immediate and
الذي يستوجب على
urgent
هذا
challenge
المجلس
that this council
الاطلاع به
must
والعمل على
deal
تحقيقه
with
في أقرب
and
الأجل.
must seek to achieve as soon as
إن
possible.
المجموعة الدولية
The
وخاصة
international community,
الدول الفاعلة فيها
especially
إن لها دور
effective
كبير
states in this
وحاسم
community, have a
في
large
التأثير على
and
الأطراف
important role in
وتفعيل رؤية
influencing the
الدولتين
parties and in
في إطار الحل
activating the
العادل والشامل
two-state
والكامل
solution within
الذي
a
يضمن قيام
just
دولة
comprehensive and
فلسطينية
complete
قابلة
peace that will
للحياة
guarantee
وعاصمتها
the
القدس
rise of a
الشرقية
viable Palestinian state with
واستتباب
East Jerusalem
الأمن
as its
والسلام
capital, as
لشعوب
well
المنطقة
as
دون
the spread
استثناء.
of peace and security for the people throughout the region with no exceptions. Mr. President, in the Arab Maghreb region, a new dawn has risen over Tunisia, and the wheel of change towards democracy and a state of legal and lawful institutions with the participation of all factions of society has begun. Tunisia has become a new and active actor in building the Arab Maghreb coalition that we all hope for. As for Sister Libya, regardless of the difficulties and challenges that this North African people is facing in this transitional stage, yet no one can deny that the Libyan people are now much better off than they were over the past 40 years, and that the Libyan people enjoy the determination and resources and capabilities that would qualify it to open and turn over a new leaf in its modern history and build a democratic state that is unified and cooperative. The Libyan people have emerged victorious and liberated, not just because of their courage in the difficult times they have experienced, but because the international community, and especially the Arab League and Security Council, have offered firm support to the Libyan people and at the appropriate time.
Mr. President, it is with great optimism and determination to overcome all obstacles that the Egyptian people are moving forward in the series of changes that their national forces have endorsed. We trust that the genius of this people and their history will enable the people to overcome all difficulties and to achieve the aspirations of the Egyptian people in achievement of liberty, democracy, and justice. And here we would like to welcome the peaceful track that Sisterly Yemen has adopted in order to guarantee an organized transfer of power thanks to the GCC initiative and its successful implementation with the help of the United Nations. At the same time, we express regret over the tragedy that the the brotherly Syrian people are suffering from over the past year, and which would threaten with a civil war that whose consequences will not be welcome. Morocco welcomes the appointment of Mr. Kofi Annan as a joint special envoy on behalf of the United Nations and Arab League, and we hope that his efforts will contribute to stopping the violence and facilitating humanitarian access, as well as laying the necessary framework and groundwork to launch a national dialogue in order to implement Arab resolutions and to guarantee the territorial integrity of Sisterly Syria. In Morocco, we would also like to say that we should need to speak with one voice in order to deal with the situation by activating the relevant resolutions of the Arab League. Mr. President, in Morocco, the reforms that were launched over 10 years ago under the leadership of His Majesty Mohammed VI have given an historic push towards democracy and towards the democratic progress that the kingdom has achieved, and has also contributed to creating more individual and social freedoms, and based on strictly internal dynamics that stem from national political will. Morocco has taken important measures that included constitutional reforms that were deep and conducted elections that led to the formation of a new government which is committed to combating corruption, as well as reforming the judiciary and paying more attention to enhancing the role of women in political and economic and social life. And we are willing to continue to share our experiences with our brethren in all fields of life, including political pluralism and the role of civil society and transitional justice, as well as capacity building in order to serve a state of righteousness and law. Mr. President, despite of its internal capacities, regardless of these capacities, there is no state in our region that can stand alone against the threat of terrorism and secession and development. as well as guarantee openness and democracy alone. Therefore, any national effort will be limited if it is not completed and nourished by cooperation that is a result of history as well as the requirements of the present and the aspirations for a joint future. Therefore, this cooperation will give strength and immunity to the people of the region and will enable them to achieve economic integration that would benefit all states. This, Mr. President, is what we hope to accomplish in the North African or Arab Maghreb region, which over the past few months has witnessed positive movement that is unprecedented and that calls for optimism, and we hope, I beg pardon, we will work tirelessly to continue with these dynamics in order to confront a lot of the challenges that continue to face us and the dangerous challenges that target the security and territorial integrity of our countries. We hope that this effort will receive the support and the support of all the countries of the region. Mr. President, in closing, no one can undermine the difficulties and the obstacles that must be overcome in order to achieve the objectives of a democratic transition. Moreover, no one can undermine the energy of Arab peoples and their abilities to overcome these challenges, each according to their own strengths and weaknesses, and each according to their own historical inheritance as well as different experiences. The way to strengthen democracy and build it is a long road and is a tiresome one and requires wisdom and foresight in order to entrench the foundations of stability without which a true democratic institution and structure cannot be built. And the international community has a great role to play in order to guarantee the success of these efforts and in order to give them all forms of support and throughout all the stages of democratic transition. We hope that the international community would not disappoint those people who are waiting and aspiring for this transition. Thank you, sir.
I thank the representative of Morocco for his statement, and I give the floor to the representative of China.
Mr. President, China welcomes the presence of the UK Secretary of State, Mr. Haig, to preside over today's meeting. I also wish to thank the SG, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, for his statement. The situation in the Middle East is undergoing unprecedented changes. The situations of some countries are turbulent. This has naturally caused widespread concern throughout the world. Developments in the situation in the Middle East have major impacts on world political and economic affairs. Without the stability and development of this region, the recovery of the world economy will remain elusive, and world peace will remain in serious jeopardy. When the consequences of the international economic and financial crisis are still being felt continuously, the people of the Middle East and North Africa, like the people of other regions in the world, also have demands for change and for the safeguarding of their self-interests. The reasons for the turbulence and changes in the Middle East and North Africa are multifaceted. In order to properly address these changes, we must engage in rational thinking and adopt a comprehensive and integrated approach to ensure the peace and stability of this region so that the people's demands will be met in a better and more orderly way. I would like to focus on the following 4 points. First, we must respect the desires and demands of the people of these countries for change and for development, and respect the ownership of the people of these countries in managing their internal affairs and in selecting their political system and their road of development. The primary responsibility for solving the questions of the Middle East rests with the people of the Middle East themselves. The Middle East people are masters of their own destiny. Second, we hope that countries in the region will give expression to their political aspirations through legal and non-violent means. Solve their differences through consultations and other peaceful means, and achieve proper solutions through inclusive political processes. We call on all parties to avoid violence and military conflicts and restore their stability of the countries and their normal social order as soon as possible. Third, we must adhere to the purposes and principles of the UN Charter and the basic norms of international relations, and respect the sovereignty, independence, unity, and territorial integrity of the countries in the region. The international community can provide necessary constructive assistance to the efforts of the countries to solve their internal crises through political means. China is against any attempt by external forces to engage in military intervention and to push for a regime change. Sanctions or the threat of the use of sanctions are not conducive to a proper solution of these problems. Fourth, Security Council resolutions must be implemented comprehensively and strictly. No party is to interpret them in any way they want, let alone take actions that exceed Security Council mandates. The protection of civilians must follow international humanitarian laws and other related international laws without any political motivations or purposes. China is against any interference in internal affairs in the name of humanitarianism. Mr. President, China remains, as always, firmly committed to the Arab just causes and to the Palestinian people's just demands for the restoration of their national legitimate rights. China supports the establishment of a Palestinian state on the basis of the 1967 border, with East Jerusalem as its capital, and with full sovereignty and independence, and eventually achieve peaceful coexistence between the two countries of Palestine and Israel. The current peace process in the Middle East is in a stalemate. Last weekend witnessed another upsurge of tension in Gaza. China is deeply worried at this development. Any stagnation or even setbacks in the Palestinian-Israeli peace talks can only bring more turbulence and conflict. The more complex and grim the situation is, the more the international community should intensify its diplomatic efforts and push for an early resumption of talks between the two parties. China appreciates the efforts made by the Middle East Quartet, and we support a greater role by Mr. Annan for the peace in the Middle East. Mr. President, recently China advanced a 6-point proposal for the solution of the Syrian question. We call on the Syrian government and all parties concerned to cease all violence and immediately launch an inclusive political talk. Adopt a comprehensive and detailed reform roadmap and time frame through consultations and put them into practice as soon as possible. Parties concerned in the international community must respect the sovereignty, independence, unity, and territorial integrity of Syria and create conditions for the talks between the Syrian political parties. The Syrian crisis is a very complex one. Political mediation efforts will not be able to succeed overnight, but we must persevere in tireless efforts. China has, to this end, repeatedly sent special envoys to engage with Syrian parties and to push for political talks. China supports a constructive role by Mr. Annan, Special Envoy for the UN Arab League, for a political solution of the Syrian crisis. 阿拉伯国家及阿盟在推动政治解决叙利亚危机方面所做的积极的努力。我们重视和欢迎安南特使近日对叙利亚的访问，呼吁国际社会支持，并为安南斡旋创造有利的条件。中方在叙利亚问题上没有私利，我们不庇护谁，也不刻意的反对谁。中方恪守联合国宪章的宗旨和原则，尊重叙利亚的主权及叙利亚人民的选择。任何外部势力均不应该对叙利亚进行武力的干预，推动政权更迭。中方支持联合国发挥主导作用，协调人道主义救援的努力，帮助改善当前叙利亚部分地区的人道主义状况。中方将通过红十字国际委员会向叙利亚人民提供200万美元的紧急人道主义援助。作为安理会常任理事国，中方愿忠实地履行自己的职责，同其他各方进行平等、耐心、充分的磋商，推动叙利亚危机早日获得政治解决。谢谢主席。
I thank the representative of China for his statement, and I give the floor to the representative of India.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me begin by welcoming you, Mr. Foreign Secretary, and other ministers to the Security Council. I would like to thank the UK delegation for organizing today's debate to discuss developments in West Asia and North Africa over the last 1 year. I would also like to thank the Secretary General and other distinguished speakers and you, Mr. President, for your valuable statements. We have listened carefully to the views expressed and hope that today's deliberations will help the international community develop a more coordinated and consensual outlook to the serious challenges posed by developments in the region and beyond. Mr. President, for more than a millennium now, societies in West Asia and North Africa have played an important role in world history. By virtue of the genius of their peoples, their strategic location, and more recently, their natural resources, these societies have attracted considerable interest from far and wide. Over centuries, countries in the region have built multifaceted socio-economic and strategic linkages with the rest of the world. Developments in the region have implications within and beyond the region, and they naturally are of interest to the international community. The relationship between India and the Arab world is unique, with age-old historic and cultural connections. The impact of the Arab and Islamic world on India itself has been profound and far-reaching, giving rise to a composite culture that is rich in its diversity and enduring in its essential unity. The region is home to over 6 million Indians, with some of our largest economic and trade linkages. It is also the most important source for our energy needs and, being in our extended neighborhood, vitally important to India. The unrest in West Asia and North Africa, which began more than a year ago, has its roots in the desire of people to play a greater role in shaping their destiny politically and economically. These aspirations will not be met through violence or armed struggle, nor can a solution be reached through prescriptions from outside. In fact, given the history of foreign interference, such prescriptions will not only be suspect in the eyes of various segments of society, but may also have the potential to exacerbate the problem. Mr. President, in dealing with developments in West Asia and North Africa, the international community needs to use all the tools of diplomacy at its disposal and be there to assist the concerned countries in transiting to an inclusive and participatory polity while maintaining social stability and cohesion. Since the exact nature of grievances varies from country to country, there cannot be one set of measures that can be applied to all of them. The solutions of the problems in each country have to take into consideration the society's particular circumstances and the genius of its people. However, what is certain is that solutions cannot include intervention through military force or arming of the civilian population. Such a course of action will only fuel further bloodshed and instability and create new marginalized groups. This also risks breeding extremism and intolerance, whose adverse consequences will be felt in the region and beyond. I would like to recall what the father of the Indian nation, Mahatma Gandhi, said, and I quote, "Non-violence is the greatest force at the disposal of mankind," unquote. Even during the course of the last year, we have seen that wherever changes have taken place without violence, not only has normalcy returned faster, the changes have been accepted by society as a whole. We are therefore of the considered view that the political leaders of the concerned countries in West Asia and North Africa should resolve the problem through inclusive internal political processes that meet the aspirations of their people in an atmosphere free of violence and bloodshed. The principles of national sovereignty, political independence, and territorial unity in integrity must be respected. The international community should, including through the auspices of the United Nations, use diplomatic leverage and make available technical assistance in fields such as political, security, and justice sector reforms, drafting of new constitution and legal frameworks, electoral institutions and conduct of elections, etc. Actions based on selective or partial interpretations of a mandate of the United Nations must be avoided to ensure that long-term political reconciliation is achieved among various sections of society through peaceful, inclusive political processes. Mr. President, the international community also needs to be galvanized to expeditiously resolve the long-pending problem of the West Asian and North African region, namely the Arab-Israeli conflict, including Israeli-Palestinian problem. This problem cannot be allowed to be lost in the din and preoccupations of other developments in the region. Quite apart from the fact that without resolution of this conflict, developments in West Asia and North Africa cannot be adequately addressed, we seriously run the risk of violence if the people of Palestine feel marginalized and sense a complete loss of attention to their plight. Their protests may get radicalized unless concrete action is taken to end the occupation of Arab lands so that all peoples in the region can live in peace in their respective homelands and build cooperative relations. Moreover, the call of the international community for democratic and political reforms sounds hollow to Palestinian and other people in the region living under occupation. In this connection, some important and immediate measures need to be taken, including end to all settlement activities and favorable consideration by this Council of the Palestinian application for membership to this organization. Mr. President, as the world's largest democracy, India supports measures by the countries in the region to address the grievances of their people in an atmosphere free of violence and bloodshed. India stands ready to share its experiences with the concerned countries in building democratic and plural political institutions and to partner with them in such fields as drafting of new constitutional and legal frameworks, judicial and security sector reforms, creation of impartial and independent electoral institutions, and conduct of elections, human resource development, including training and technical assistance, etc. India will continue to support this Council in meeting the challenge of assisting the countries in West Asia and North Africa so that they can implement required political reforms without recourse to violence and violation of fundamental human rights, and build an inclusive political system that enables participation of all people. This alone will create long-term peace, security, and stability within the region and beyond. I thank you.
I thank the representative of India for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of South Africa.
Thank you, Mr. President. South Africa expresses its appreciation to the Secretary General, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, for his statement to the Council. We thank the delegation of the United Kingdom for organizing this important debate. It is indeed important that we should reflect on the momentous events which resulted in significant political changes in the Arab world. More importantly, there's an opportunity to share ideas on how to deal with those countries that are still embroiled in conflicts and those going through a post-conflict phase. The year 2011 will forever be ingrained in the memory of the world as the year of Arab uprisings, characterized by inter alia, mass protest, and armed insurgencies. Mr. President, our assessment of the uprisings in the Arab states, many created as colonial constructs resulting from the Sykes-Picot Agreement, shows that these protests were, among others, a cry for political emancipation from decades of totalitarianism, a cry for proportionate distribution of wealth and power, and a call for participation in democratic processes, including governance and access to economic opportunities. It is clear that the patience of these peoples who had lived under these repressive regimes for many years had been tested to the maximum. Indeed, the social contract in these societies had been broken down irretrievably. The Arab Spring is a clear indication of how much the people of these countries yearn for freedom, democracy, and other basic human rights. The 5 volumes of the United Nations Development Programme's Arab League Human Development Report provides relevant insights into the causes and warnings of the Arab revolutions. The first edition, published in 2002, noted that the freedom deficit in the Arab world undermines human development and is one of the most painful manifestations of lagging political development. Subsequently, 6 years later, in 2009, the 2009 edition further noted that approximately 30% of the youth in the Arab countries is unemployed. More than 50% of the population is under the age of 24, and that 51 million new jobs needed to be created by 2020 in order to avoid an increasing in the unemployment rate. These and other similar reports should have raised the alarms in the Arab world and compel governments to realize that the socio-economic and development needs of the people, particularly the youth, needed to be addressed. The fact that most, if not all, of these uprisings were initiated by the youth should not be surprising. Obviously, in today's rapidly globalizing and integrated world, the turmoil in the Arab world could not only affect the Arab peoples and be limited to the Arab world only. The rest of the world has been affected in many ways, including through rising oil prices, the growing number of refugees, the rise in the number of illegal weapons, and increased tension between nations. Given the umbilical cord that connects Africa to the Arab world, the African continent has been adversely affected as a result of undesirable spillover effects of the Arab revolutions. Excellencies, in this regard, we humbly offer the following thoughts for consideration. Firstly, South Africa strongly believes that it is essential that governments should respect the will of the people. It is therefore essential that the peoples of the region gain the opportunity to determine their future. This can only happen if the system established reflects the aspiration of the peoples, including women and the youth of the various countries in the region. Secondly, security and development are interlinked. As the Security Council acknowledged in its presidential statement of February 2011, development can no longer be divorced from deliberations and interventions that are traditionally security-related. The Council also recognized that this is an essential element of its work in the maintenance of international peace and security. We emphasize that this does not necessarily mean that the Council has to usurp developmental functions undertaken by other bodies within the United Nations systems, but rather it should take social and development issues into account in relevant deliberations within its charter mandate. Given the nature of the developments in the Middle East and North Africa in the past year, more focus should be placed on the relevant development challenges the people of that region face. Thirdly, South Africa reiterates its view that this Council should strengthen its conflict prevention mechanisms by elaborating a comprehensive prevention strategy. At the center of this strategy should be the strengthening of the United Nations and regional early warning apparatus. In our view, it is vital that developmental aspects should also be integrated in our efforts at conflict prevention, resolution, management, and post-conflict peace building. Fourthly, and related to the above, partnerships with international financial institutions, in particular the World Bank and regional development structures, are critical in buttressing peace efforts in countries in transition. Equally, we emphasize the importance of context-specific and national-owned interventions. Fifthly, as these countries transition into democracy, there is a need to address the wrongs of the past through efforts aimed at reconciliation and transitional justice. Reconciliation efforts should be undertaken and supported by this Council. We would warn against prescribing how these efforts should be undertaken, as each conflict is unique, but the international community should support the peoples of the region in this important area. Related to reconciliation efforts is the need to ensure the adherence to the rule of law. In January, the Council emphasized the need for universal adherence to and implementation of the rule of law, and that the promotion of the rule of law and justice was an indispensable element for peaceful coexistence. The discussion underscored the inextricable link between the promotion of justice and the attainment of peace in conflicts and post-conflict situations. Lastly, we should warn that it is not in the interest of international peace and security for the international community, including the Security Council, to use the plight of the Arab peoples to pursue self-interest and execute regime change. As the UN, we should abide to the same international law that we purport to be master protagonists of. Therefore, the UN itself and countries implementing UN mandates should at all times adhere to international law. In dealing with these many challenges, it is important that we work together with regional and sub-regional organizations who often than not have the relevant insights into the dynamics of a given conflict and oftentimes what solutions to employ. We have seen this collaboration produce positive results recently in Yemen, and we hope that it will equally assist in respect of the situation in Syria. Whereas the Arab Spring has brought a glimmer of hope to many in the Arab world, it has unfortunately left some of the long-standing issues of human rights abuses and colonization unresolved. In this regard, we are reminded of the plight of the people of Western Sahara and Palestine, who still yearn for freedom despite the seismic political and economic shifts that engulf the region. In conclusion, the observation by former Secretary General Kofi Annan, who is the current envoy to Syria, when he stated that, and I quote, "We will not enjoy development without security. We will not enjoy security without development. And we will not enjoy either without respect for human rights. Unless all these causes are advanced, none will succeed." This quotation remains valid today. And flowing from these words, we offer our support to the peoples of the Arab world as they chart a better future for themselves. We hope that at the center of our efforts to improve the lives of these peoples, we will be guided by the notion of creating an environment within which citizens can live in harmony, fulfill themselves, and enjoy life in larger freedom. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of South Africa for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Azerbaijan.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I would like to thank the United Kingdom for convening this debate on the situation in the Middle East. We welcome His Excellency Foreign Secretary Mr. William Hague, Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, and other distinguished participants at this very important meeting. Mr. President, finding a point of departure for discussions on the pending challenges that the Middle East societies have found themselves in and extrapolating on prospective opportunities ensuing from these challenges could be an onerous task. Suffice it to say that the wave of changes that encompassed the region since the last year has dramatically altered the security situation, political and societal status quo in many Middle Eastern societies and beyond. The upheavals that set some countries of the region on the path of transformation have fundamentally reshaped the typical set of features that characterize the region. The changes reflected the natural aspiration of people for greater freedom and wider political participation. Against this backdrop, the will and tenacity of people to write their own future within democratic states with functioning state institutions, respect for the rule of law and human rights should be commended and supported. We believe that consistency and innocent effort will lead to the achievement of target objectives. At the same time, in spite of the promises brought by the process of democratic transition, one should not forget that this is an extremely responsible stage in the history of the Middle East that demands highest vigilance and laborious work in order to rule out miscalculations and unpredictability as for the region's future. The method of violence as a means of achieving political objective is not itself a democracy, which cannot be propagated by the sword and imposed from outside. And a process within either an individual state or a region as a whole should be built on this sound legitimate basis, while progressive economic and democratic development should be an objective for all governments. Azerbaijan commends the reconciliation efforts of the national authorities in a number of countries of the Middle East, aimed at finding, negotiating an effective solution with participation of all layers and political forces of their societies. Mr. President, we regret to see the lack of progress in the Middle East peace process. At the same time, Azerbaijan commends and highly values the consistent efforts of Jordan to revive the dialogue and resume the negotiations toward the achievement of a comprehensive, just and lasting solution. Azerbaijan is deeply concerned about continuing illegal settlement activities in the occupied Palestinian territories. Apart from impact on the rights, freedoms, and everyday lives of Palestinians, settlements cause serious damage to the peace process and more dangerously threaten a two-state solution and the emergence of a viable Palestinian state. In this regard, I would like to stress it once again that in contrast to some other well-known situations involving groundless and illegitimate territorial claims, including those under the concocted pretext of care for ethnic minority groups, the people of Palestine has been recognized as having the right to self-determination and statehood. We proceed from the importance of reaffirming with respect to the occupied Palestinian territories and similar situations in other parts of the world, the continuing applicability of all relevant international legal norms, achieving the invalidation of activities aimed at the consolidation of military occupations, initiating urgent measures towards removing the adverse effects of such activities and discouraging any further practices of the same or similar nature. The Security Council cannot remain indifferent to situations involving the serious violation of international humanitarian and human rights law and in performing its primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security, must react adequately in order to put an end to illegal practices and policies and ensure that human rights and fundamental freedoms are observed and respected. It is also important to fully utilize the advantage of cultural diversity through promoting intercommunal dialogue and reconciliation, while categorically rejecting and invalidating any manifestation of ethnic and religious intolerance. Mr. President, the situation in Syria remains worrisome, with rampant violence and human rights abuses that resulted in increasing civilian death toll. We are of the strong view that the only solution to the crisis in Syria is through an all-inclusive and Syrian-led political process, where all national stakeholders demonstrate determination to solve the crisis peacefully. Azerbaijan encourages all parties in Syria to fully cooperate with the Joint Special Envoy of the United Nations and the League of Arab States, Mr. Kofi Annan. We hope that his mission will contribute to ending violence and facilitating a peaceful solution. As it has been pointed out during the this debate, repression does not deliver stability, peace, or security, while governments which suppress basic freedoms will always be unstable. As a country suffering from prolonged occupation of its territories and resulting mass population displacement, Azerbaijan believes that the same understanding should equally apply to interstate relations. The behavior of governments which resort to force to capture the territory of another sovereign state, authorize attacks on civilians, and ethnic cleansing cannot be tolerated. It is of paramount importance that the international community unites its efforts and speaks in one voice to reject repressive policies in interstate relations, overcome mutual mistrust and double standards, and achieve the uniform application of international law and democratization of international relations. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Azerbaijan for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Colombia.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And please pass on to Minister William Hague, Foreign Minister, how much we appreciate him being here with us today for the debate, as well as to the other foreign affairs ministers that came to be with us at the meeting. The Foreign Affairs Minister of Colombia, for unexpected reasons, wasn't able to participate, but she did intend to. I'd like also to thank the Secretary General for his interesting analysis of the subject at hand, and which illustrates very well how things are developing. What has happened in recent years in countries of the Middle East and the north of Africa, which has become part of what we are calling the Arab Spring. In this, we can see various common traits. A population that is overwhelmingly young, affected by high rates of unemployment, exclusive political systems that aren't able to adequately represent the interests of various sectors of society, and to this we must add the impact of new information technologies in the cohesiveness and leadership of popular movements. Under these conditions, where profound inequities, political exclusion, economic and social exclusion converge together, we're seeing a process of transformation, looking for economic and political change, as well as new ways of participating and opening up new fora and mechanisms of expression, which, in summary, imply the demand for fundamental rights. Notwithstanding these common elements, the transformations and processes have followed very different courses in the different countries of the region, and this is why we need to analyze each case on its own merits. The response of the international community to the challenges and opportunities that arise from this process have been centered around prevention, the cessation of violence, and violent repression against civilian populations, crying out for their fundamental human rights to be respected. This includes the freedom of election, association, recognition of the rights of women and gender equality, the rights of minorities, as well as access to economic opportunities. In a region that is so complex as well as vital for the maintenance of international peace and security, the authorities encounter major difficulties and limitations in responding to the demands and expectations of a population that is clamoring for reforms. In order to overcome a past of authoritarianism and sectarianism, it's not enough to simply hold periodic elections. There needs to be a gradual establishment of political parties, the strengthening of civil society organizations, ideological pluralism, free access to information, and the exercise of fundamental freedoms and human rights. This requires time, a time of learning, and the decisive support of the international community for national efforts. Transition towards societies that are more democratic and representative requires the convergence and participation of all sectors of society around the principles and aims which are common. Solid institutional arrangements are required in order to avoid polarization during the construction of institutions and the legal framework which will encompass relations between citizens and their governments. Mr. President, the international community amazed to see how in Syria there's disproportionate force being used against the civilian population. Systematic violence and violation of human rights is being seen, and there are extremes that have been reached which must be qualified as crimes against humanity. This is unacceptable and it must be robustly rejected and condemned, particularly by the Security Council, using the mechanisms that it has at its disposal. On this firm understanding, Colombia has supported and participated in the efforts of the international community aimed at putting an end to this unheard-of situation and all forms of violation of human rights in order to promote a transition to pluralistic democratic systems. In order to avoid situations such as this, the Security Council should stress the use of preventive diplomacy that it has at its disposal in order to reduce the threats of armed violence and associated costs. We must use all peaceful means available to us to protect civilians from violence in accordance with the principles and aims of the Charter of the United Nations and in full respect for territorial integrity, national unity, sovereignty, and the political independence of states.
Debe preservar la estrecha colaboración con las organizaciones regionales,
close cooperation with regional organizations and give a priority to strategies aimed at preventing conflicts, mediation and good offices. The League of Arab States, the African Union, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation and the Gulf Cooperation Council have a privileged position. They have unique access to key players and knowledge and experience that are exceptional in knowing the region, and therefore their participation as strategic partners is key for developing actions which are appropriate to the particular circumstances and needs of each country of the region. My country naturally gives all its support to the actions of these organizations. Our support and that of the international community in these situations will be more effective and sustainable if we are able to recognize the political and cultural contexts and if the governments and peoples continue working together towards consolidating on the progress made. The spontaneous movement of the Arab Spring opens the way for the progressive establishment of states and governments based on genuine respect for democratic principles and the rule of law. These recently formed governments should anchor their legitimacy in the respect for the rights of the population, the provision of basic social services, the generation of employment, and the creation of conditions for sustainable economic development, the benefits of which will be a tangible reality for all citizens without distinction. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Colombia for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, Mr. President. A very warm welcome to Mr. William Hague and the PR for convening today's high-level debate. I would also like to take this opportunity to welcome the Secretary General and the Honorable Foreign Ministers of the United States, France, Russia, Germany, Guatemala, and Portugal. Mr. President, sitting in this House today, I start off by referring to your distinguished compatriot in Cambridge, Mr. Stephen Hawkins, and his fraternity who are with him in surveying the universe, specifically in their demarcation of dark space/spaces. These dark spaces constitute the vast majority of the universe today. And in this hall today, I witnessed these spaces in many long diatribes where so much was said and yet not said. Hawkins has cautioned all of us. The dark spaces which constitute the vast majority of the universe are not dormant spaces. These vast spaces in majority will one day unleash their silent fury in time, and he cautions us to be prepared. I believe, Mr. President, so should we be prepared, in so much that we do not say or dare to say in this House today. In North Africa and the Middle East, under discussion today, we have witnessed important developments. My country firmly believes in fulfillment of the aspirations of the people, their right to be the masters of their own destiny, to speak as well as to be heard, and to know our legitimate aspirations, and no effort should be spared in accommodating this. We therefore strongly condemn the use of force against peaceful protesters and violations of human rights wherever they are committed, and irrespective of who the perpetrators are. It's a matter of principle. Being a democratic country firmly committed to the ideals, values, and principles of the United Nations, we believe that the legitimate aspirations of people should be accommodated peacefully, without external interference, and in a manner consistent with sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity of states. Today, in support of those embattled societies, I once again repeat before this House, please remember, no movement in the world succeeds without external help, including the great revolutions. You cannot stroke them out with a pen. And anyone who seeks to rationalize their principled position, riding on the high horse of morality, are very truly need to narrow the distances by treading slowly on what they might even call lowly grounds. But the support that we extend to the legitimate wishes of people has to be within the confines of international law and the United Nations Charter. Interference in internal affairs of sovereign states and supporting concepts like regime change are alien to the ethos of international good neighborliness. The changes in the region we're discussing today have often been referred to as the Arab Spring. The concept of spring brings forth images of rebirth, change, and renewal, of warmth and beauty. It should have an air of tranquility and harmony about it. More than anything else, it is a natural process that can neither be forced nor be abrupt. This has to be understood. Winter evolves into spring, and spring brings an end to winter's hardness. This natural process of evolution must, therefore, be allowed to take its course, not interrupted. So, we welcome change when it is locally led, peaceful, and is an expression of the aspirations of the people. Solutions to problems have to be found by the people themselves and not, I repeat, not imposed from outside. Mr. President, the Jordanian foreign minister made a remarkable statement on the 29th of February, Mr. Nasser Judeh, when he told the Foreign Affairs Committee of the European Parliament, and I keep going back to them time and again, and I quote again, There is no complete Arab Spring or Arab awakening without peace in the Middle East, and there will never be peace in the Middle East without a solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This, then, in the context of my speech, is the winter of Arab discontent. Can we usher in a vast spring with this winter consistently raising its head? I don't think so. Denial of the Palestinian right to self-determination is at the heart of unrest in the region. For lasting peace in the Middle East, progress on Syria-Israel, Lebanon-Israel conflicts is necessary as well. Israel must withdraw completely from occupying Lebanese lands and the Syrian Golan, in compliance with relevant General Assembly and Security Council resolutions. With the continuation of the Israeli settlement activity, hope for the Palestinians to have a viable state of their own is fading fast. We've had grim reminders of that delivered to us by the recent briefings from the Department of Political Affairs, as well as a number of member states. There's a general belief that the situation in the occupied Palestinian territory is becoming increasingly volatile. Factors like ever-increasing settlement activity, as well as settler violence, continued blockade of Gaza, diminishing economic prospects for the population, vandalization of the holy sites, the plight of Palestinian prisoners, etc., means that the people are at tenterhooks. A small ignition can turn into a big fire. We also condemn any pipe bombs being fired from the Gaza. But we believe the biggest threat to international peace and security arises from this particular aspect. Yet the Council continues not to do anything cogent for the Palestinians. Each time we meet, we are told the Quartet has now discussed this matter. I wait for the day for the Quartet to produce a result that will substantially change the plight of these people. And one of the best things we can do, and we have moved it, that if it is okay for the Gaza to be given provisions, well, we should take a flotilla and land on the beaches and take to them through the United Nations the security they require, the food they require. We strongly feel that now is an appropriate time as any to send a strong and unified signal to the occupying power to stop its activities, specifically in land grabbing. There continuously arises a matter I would like to dispel once and for all from here, may or may not succeed. It's basically whenever anyone feels that is Islam or democracy incompatible, and then they answer it by saying it's not incompatible. Only Huntington really believes they're incompatible, and I believe that it is a question of time even there. But I would like to say very emphatically, our Prophet, peace be upon him, basically called all our brothers in Islam as brothers, and then asked them to share their surpluses and share their shortcomings. In my opinion, there is no better manifestation of democracy. Furthermore, he asked the Muslims to reach out to the world in peace. And for reasons of learning, he turned round and said, go to China, which was not a Muslim brother state. Doesn't matter. Shows the vastness of the vision of the person, of the Prophet. And when he said, and he found that things were not good for Muslims in Mecca, where he started out from, He said, go to our brotherly king, the king of Ethiopia, and he will look after you, who happened to be a Christian. This vast reach out shows the beauty of what is already available. We don't need to confer too much distinction on Huntington. I'll conclude this segment by reiterating our support for the Palestinian people in their just struggle for peace and the right to self-determination, and their membership, as was said by my Indian colleague, of the United Nations at the earliest. We feel that the biggest challenge of the Middle East will remain Palestine, and that opportunity is being afforded by this wave of fulfillment of aspirations in the name of the people of the Middle East through the Arab Spring. I feel that the Palestinians should also benefit and not lose. And I reiterate, without resolution of this core issue, as was said by the Foreign Minister of Jordan, we will not be able to see real peace in the region. I would also like to address 5 crucial points raised by the Secretary General in his report, because I believe that these are crucial points. He himself says so. He first speaks of leaders choosing the path of meaningful reform, and people do not want cosmetic changes that give only the merest taste of democracy. Now, I believe that a great American president many years ago spoke of the 4 freedoms, and I believe that there must be a basic intent of the United Nations of a basic legislative action by the General Assembly and this Council, that what constitutes basically the basic elements of democratic requirement of statehood, in which these freedoms should be enshrined. And everyone who wishes to be a member here must at some stage be able to resolve and come to this particular aspect. So I believe by just saying it as a pillar would not be enough. It would be important to have a minimum legislative induction into all the documents in the world where this is the minimum requirement. Promote pluralism, the rights of minorities. At the moment, we just celebrated International Women's Day. The women get that once a year, and they happen to be a majority in the world. I feel that we have to rectify these matters first. We have to understand that women have a crucial role to play, without which we'll never get anywhere. I also take very strongly his third aspect, that women have stood in the squares and streets demanding change and have now a right to sit at the table with real influence in decision-making and safe from violence, intimidation, and abuse. This is happening even now in the Arab Spring. Last week, 8 members of this council sat with women from Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen. And we heard these women and were shocked. And one of the things they said, and I think we should support very strongly here, is that all financing through the United Nations, 25% of it must be earmarked for delivery into the hands of women. Don't forget, they constitute 75% of the world. They ultimately end up feeding, clothing, looking after children, and doing all the work and having to do it. And everywhere they don't get the benefit of their husband's employment. So, especially of the world, third world. So, they must get. And 25% of all delegations visiting or calling or meeting with the United Nations should be women. Make it necessary that they are part of, they have given more sacrifices than anyone in the spring, as we call it. Then let them be able to fulfill by being a part of this complete change. When we speak about the fourth pillar, opportunities for young people, there are 200 million more in Asia. I think this takes on an importance which cannot be denied, and there must be regional peace, I say, for the Palestinians. If you had a Balfour Act which brought in the State of Israel to where it is today, let's have a Balfour Pact for the Palestinians as well. In the end, in context of world peace and the Middle East, I would like to stress, while we understand all sorts of needs arising on security, I would say it would be better for this region and the whole world if the situation of Iran can be stopped from moving towards conflict. And it will be the sort of conflict which might have a very, very unfortunate impact on the world, and it might be the proverbial last straw which breaks the camel's back on world peace. I hope not. We understand the seriousness of it. We also hope, with the accumulated diplomacy here, we can do better. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for his statement. The representative of Morocco has asked to take the floor to make a further brief statement. I give him the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Mr. President, I will be extremely brief. Earlier, a delegation thought it was a good idea to raise a situation that has absolutely nothing to do with our debate and made comparisons that are very ill-founded and unfortunate. I do not want to continue that attempt to walk the debate, and less so to tarnish the positive message of support and encouragement that we would like to see emerge from this high-level meeting. This is our aim, and it must be that of all delegations. I would like each and every person to commit to that and to make a positive contribution to that. Thank you, sir.
I thank the representative of Morocco for his statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The Security Council has thus concluded the present stage of its consideration of the item on its agenda. The meeting is adjourned.